Welcome to DSM's Black Art Matter series. We're here today with Dr. William George-Twyman, who is a Dallas native and the head of choral studies at Booker T. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Great, good. So we're going to jump right in with the first question we have for you. And the series is called Black Art Matters. So we always like to ask our guest first, what does Black identity mean to and for you?
The question of Black identity for me is the way that one situates their race and their nationality in the decisions that they make. And for me, it is, it's always about seeking artistic experiences that feel authentic to me as a whole person. Like, am I serving myself, and am I serving the community, and am I serving history well with what I do? So, for me, it's always a question of, is the product that I'm producing true to who I am, and does it say about me what it should?
Yeah. And is that kind of definition that you have created for yourself, has that always been there, or is that a recent realization? When did you come into it? I
have to say that, I had my own quest for sort of figuring out what my own identity was. It's definitely been a process. I grew up with a different concept of race because being a biracial person with an Asian parent, the sort of atmosphere in the country around 80s and 90s was it definitely in biracial situations you definitely favor one over the other, and so the decision that I made kind of growing up was, well, let's play up sort of the Asian side a little bit, because that's we talk about Asians being model minority and having that sort of less social pressure, but and so I tried to play that up, and then I realized midway through school when I was getting my degrees that it wasn't really true, and it wasn't necessarily the right way, because by denying an entire part of myself, I wasn't getting the results that I think I needed and that I wanted. And so a few years ago, I started to really re-examine what I was supposed to be doing and what race meant to me and how I was supposed to deal with it. And I decided that I was like, you know what, I need to kind of grow a little bit, and I need to learn a little bit more. So I started to read more and listen to more Black podcasts and things of just kind of exploring the experience. And the more I heard and the more I listened, the more I was like, oh no, that's right. That's me, and that's what I've been feeling this whole time, and what I've been denying this whole time. So I just kind of changed my thinking about it. And I said, it's about carving out a space that I can be, where I can be, as opposed to trying to fit into somebody else's space, right? Because that's you never really fit in that way. So
in that re-examination of race that you went through a couple of years ago, along with that, did that come with a re-examination of the type of art you wanted to create and put out?
Absolutely. Simply because, in music, especially in classical music and especially in classical choral music, the non-white experience is very much a novelty still. Like, you talk to your, any choir director around, and they say, when they're going through, what do I need to put on a concert? The phrase will always come, well, I need something fun to close with, so we'll throw a spiritual in the close. And it's just like, that's so short-sighted. And so I finally had to start saying, you know what? I'm not going to worry so much about, how do I say this? I'm not going to worry so much about satisfying the expectations for us as conductors. Like a conductor's good if they can do this list of sort of dead white composers kind of thing, and that's the legitimacy you get. And then if you're studying African American or African diaspora music or something like that, it's considered a specialty area, and you're, which it should be. It deserves to be treated as such, as like in a focused way, but it's not novelty.
Right.
And so I just started to say, you know what, I'm going to do the things that I think are important, and I'm going to give voice to the people that don't normally get heard as much because of fashion or tradition or whatever. So I've been really trying to change and shift the way that I think and perform, and I ask my students to perform, because they're asking now to say, we want to do music that really that represents us and that we can see ourselves in.
Right.
And to have it be treated with the same care and the same integrity as the your traditional stuff, and that's difficult.
And it's interesting that having your students ask for that alongside you re-examining and coming into that. It sounds like it's a growing and a learning process that you and your students are going through together to find what that is.
Absolutely. And what I've learned about students, especially right now, is that there's a lot more understanding and a lot more nuance and subtlety to their language now. And the experiences that we used to think were reserved for adults, people are experiencing those situations earlier and earlier. And they understand that it's important to go through these things, and it's important for all of us to understand that we're going through it together. Right. So with their own sort of artistic renaissances that they're going through, they look to us as their teachers and say, well, what are you doing to help us? Are you interested in this, or are you trying to just teach the same old way?
Right.
And it's great to be challenged by students like that, because when a student comes to me and says, we've done a lot of German music from this time period. Is there anything else that we can do that's a little bit, maybe a little different, a little bit more engaging? And so it's been interesting. It's been interesting from both sides, both as a teacher and as somebody who's learning. It's just been really interesting to just see the slight shift in everybody's attitudes when it comes to music and classical music specifically. It's just really interesting.
So I want to take a quick step back here and kind of go into the intersectionality of identities, because you mentioned earlier you being a biracial man yourself. There's a lot of intersectionality of identity, I'm sure, that you've experienced in your life and that you have to deal with in your life. How are those intersections that you've discovered, faced, examined, influenced your personal growth as an individual, but also your professional growth as an artist?
I think the core thing about intersectionality for me is that along with intersectionality, you have to be comfortable with the idea of simultaneity, like that many things can coexist at the same time, and multiple things can be true without negating everything else. So, for a piece of music, for instance, it can be educational, it can be interesting, it can be valuable, but at the same time, it can also be misogynistic, it can also be racist, it can also be, patriarchal, it can be a lot of things. And so with the deeper understanding of the simultaneity of things that are going on, that sometimes upon reflection and upon evaluation, something that has long been held as, oh, this is great and we should do it, and this is something that everybody should know, then when you dig deeper into it and you see at the same time, well, said composer of this piece also has a history of being anti-Semitic and also having their music used in, sort of terroristic type of ways from a government. And you have to then evaluate what's more important. The tradition of this is great and we need to learn it and use it all the time, and but we have all of this new information. So how do we reckon with that? And so for me, it had to, personally, when it came to art, I had to start making some difficult decisions sometimes about, well, my teachers and my professors and things have said this is important. Right. But on my own examination, I'm like, this is not as important as you think it is. And you have to just be brave enough to say, I'm not going to do that, even though everybody expects me to because of this reason, and this reason. And those reasons have to be enough. And if they aren't for people, well, then that's not my issue anymore. It becomes that other person's issue. And if they can't understand it or they can't reconcile that with themselves, then we just have to either continue to have that dialogue about it, or we, are at the parting of the ways on that. Yeah. It's just.
So where does, for you, where does the end of that dialogue come? Where's that tolerance level threshold for you?
Well, as my mother told me growing up, it's okay to be wrong, but it's never okay to stay wrong. So if I make a decision musically that I think is great, and then somebody comes to me with new information, they're like, actually, did you know this or did you know this? And I go, oh, okay, I'm going to take that information, I'm going to sort of integrate it into my thinking. And then I make the decision. I'm like, is the new information worth changing what I thought? And most times it is. Most times I go, oh, okay, I can see why this would be problematic. And that's totally okay. For instance, last year in my advanced choir at school in chorale, we had this really beautiful set that we had designed together, that just sort of leading from one song into another one. And we had rehearsed it and it was really lovely. And then midway through, I was reading an article on Stephen Foster and his minstrel music. And the very tune that I had taught has a history as a minstrel song, and that I did not know that. Right. And I took that information to the students. I said, listen, this is what we're doing. This is the information I have. What do you think about that? Universally, the kids were like, we shouldn't do that then. If it's going to offend somebody and if it has this kind of history, we absolutely shouldn't do it. And I was like, you're right, we shouldn't. And we didn't. And I took it from them and we filed it away, and I said, we won't do that. And then we just subbed in something that was intentionally opposite from that. That portrayed the same message and had the same beauty and the same musical integrity, that just avoided all of that problematic stuff. And as musicians, as artists in general, but specifically as musicians and conductors, if after you get information like that and you still make the decision that, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway because it's what I planned and it's what I wanted, then you've really lost a bit of your security of authority in being able to determine what's best for your group, because they know it, especially if they know it and they brought it to you, and you say, well, I don't really care about that. I'm going to do that anyway. It's like it seems counterproductive to do that.
So what I really love about what you just said is that kind of student first approach in the answer you just gave. So I have a follow-up question to that has been brought up many times by the other educators that we've had on this series. Do you find as a person of color in a position of power, as both the head of choral studies, but also as a classroom teacher, that it's a more of a challenge for you to go against a quote unquote system rather than your white counterparts?
Let me see. I would say yes, it is a challenge for different reasons. I think that anytime a person of color is in a position of power or a position of authority, in a room in a diverse room of people, it's important to just sort of sit in that and know that not only are you directing things and moving things around and making change and things like that, but you're also serving as sort of an example to the people that are in the room, And so what I like to think of is that if there are students of color in my classroom that are seeing me do what I do, and if they are in any way like, you know what, I've never seen somebody do that. I've never seen somebody who looks like me do this. If I can reach that person and make them think, hey, there's another avenue for me to go through or to go down, I've done my work there. And I love that. One of the popular questions that's kind of going around social media, it pops up every now and then, is people always ask that question, when was the first time in your schooling that you had a black male teacher that wasn't a coach, right? And for a lot of my students, I'm the first one they've ever seen. And I'm definitely the first one that they've ever seen in a music role, in a classical music role. And so it's super important. I do have to say that I have a bit of an edge over a lot of other classroom teachers in that Booker T. Washington is such an affirming and progressive place that they make sure that whatever we want to do and however we need to express ourselves, they support it. If it's enriching and it's good for the students, then they love it, and they try to get as many diverse people in front of them as possible. Now, the educational system has a lot of things that need to kind of get fixed with regards to sort of race and racial relations and things like that. But every day that I get to go to work and do what I do, I think helps further it just a little bit. Yeah. All of us that are in there doing it, my white counterparts too, we're all sort of pushing the idea forward, and I think that's really helping.
Yeah. So outside of Booker T, then, what do you see your role in pushing that kind of work and those thoughts and that movement forward on a district-wide level, and then even beyond that on an industry-wide level for the work that you do?
Well, I think right now, every arts organization in this state, and indeed in the country as well, is really going through a lot of deep self-reflection about, what have we done as an organization to sort of address the inequalities in the systems that we operate in. And so for me, something that I do outside of the classroom is I try my best to, serve on committees and things or, and things like that are focused specifically on these issues. And go to forums, speak out at things, write if you can. Like for me, there's always a pressure to write and publish and put it out there. But, if you have a chance to, write an open letter, write a letter to the editor, write your friends, ask your friends what's going on, give them ideas that you're working on and say, hey, this is kind of what we're doing. This is some things, these are some issues that we've run up against and this is how we solve them. Take that as you wish. So it's a lot of service and a lot of conversations. People forget that there's great power in a one-on-one conversation. And a lot of times people who are confused or unsure about how to proceed in a sticky racial situation or something like that, sometimes they just need to sit down and talk to somebody and say, okay, here's what I was presented with. This is the situation. Yeah. What would you do? How would you help me? Can you help me kind of navigate this? And that's what you can do. Just be an advocate for everybody in whatever way you can. Yeah. And just keep that consistent in all the dealings you have with people. Yeah.
So your willingness to serve, it sounds like a very conscious one and a very intentional one. Can you talk about when you're in those service roles, the line that you see between being an advocate for your community versus speaking on behalf of your entire community?
Okay. So the mistake I think that a lot of us make when we're talking about, big racial pillars, be they African American or Asian or whatever, is that racial cultures are not monolithic,
right?
And everyone's experience in that culture is not the same,
correct?
Right, and so it really isn't anybody's responsibility, any one person's responsibility to take on the mantle of speaking for all of anybody.
Right.
Right. All we can do is to say, here's my experience inside of this sort of silo of wherever we're talking. And what I think we should do from what my estimation of the situation is, this is what's going to help us all, I think. Not speaking for all, but speaking on behalf of all, like helping each other or in support of all, I think is the way to go with that. And so for me, I just have to remind people sometimes, my experience is much different than some people, so I cannot speak for everybody. But I have information of what I've observed from those people, and I can share what they have told me. And that's just kind of where we are. Yeah. I would never want to co-opt somebody's experience and say that I speak for it when I've never experienced it, because that's not fair. So that's kind of how I approach that.
So your conscious willingness to serve and share your experiences sounds like it would also naturally come with the reliving of some trauma in those experiences. Can you talk about how you deal with that?
Well, let me tell you a little bit of a story about this, and this might put it into context a little bit. Over the summer, we had an organization was having a forum, sort of, bring your experience here, and you can tell us what it is that you think we need to do differently with regards to race and blah, blah, blah. And so a few of us, 9-10 of us decided, volunteered to speak. And we kind of shared some painful stories, painful memories and stuff like that. And, we were met with some real sententious nods of white liberal understanding. And we understood, we get it, we understand it, and stuff like that. And what I came away from that experience with is the understanding that from a white supremacist standpoint, public reliving of pain is the only way that some people will admit that it's real. If somebody that they see puts it out there, and then they can see it. My feeling about that is eventually I am going to get very tired of performing my pain for you so that you might understand it, right? So what I've started telling people is, or saying to people is, if I must, in order to make you come towards the middle of it, just to kind of meet me somewhere so we can talk, I will do that for you. I will do that, because if that's what you need, then that's what I will do. But you need to understand that this is not easy, and these stories are not, they don't fade. The pain does not fade with time. And every time we tell this story, it opens the wound again. And those of us who are willing to do that in order to push the issues forward or push change forward, some of us have come to sort of understand that. Yeah. And we mitigate the pain through art, through, through other pursuits that aren't related to that. Right. But for me personally, I know that the stories don't go away, and the pain doesn't go away. But it's important for me to revisit those things with greater understanding each time I tell it. Right. Because each time I tell that story, I know more about it than I did the last time I told it. And it makes it helps me understand myself better, and it helps me understand the situation better, because I can separate myself from it a little bit.
So outside of your art, when it comes to support on a very personal level for you as you relive those traumas and you tell those stories, and like you said, the pain doesn't go away, I think it's important for our audiences to know, what do you go to help support and sustain yourself that's not within your art?
Well, for me, I like to do, I'm a musician all the time, and it's very easy for me to sort of fall back into, I'll do music, and that'll kind of lull me into sort of a sense. But I've tried to explore other art forms, even the ones that I'm not great at, like that I can't do, but I can appreciate. I like to do that, and I like to reconnect with reconnect with identity based on what I'm looking at or what I choose to consume.
Right.
So like if I'm feeling particularly down about an issue or a situation that involves, colorism, right? Then I'll try to find some sort of media, be it art or film or something like that, that uplifts that message and shows a good way of, well, we've been dealing with the idea of colorism forever. So what do you want to, what kind of film will affirm you, go watch Imitation of Life, go watch something that affirms you so that you can see that this is not new and what did they have to say about it that could help you?
Yeah.
What can history tell you about this so that you understand that you're handling it the best way you can, So you have to find connections in something. Therapy helps, going and actually seeing, well, maybe not now, but
virtually seeing,
or, just text conversations or phone conversations with a professional always helps.
Yeah.
It's just somebody who's impartial and doesn't feel obligated to make you feel great, that's just here to listen to you and tell you kind of how it is. That is more than valuable. And of course, just being able to separate yourself from it and to decompress.
Yeah.
To be able to say, you know what? I'm a black man and I'm going to be a black man all day today. And whatever's going to happen to me is going to happen to me. But I'm not going to worry about it as much. I'm going to choose to be involved in something that I feel comfortable with and excited about. And I'm going to let that carry me through as opposed to worrying.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's so important for people who are watching this series to understand that there's more support that goes into
Absolutely.
Helping us through this work. So I'm going to shift gears here just a bit.
Of course.
So you're one of the few guests that we've had on that actually has young children as well. And I wonder, is there a difference in the way you talk about or focus on kind of current societal injustices and issues with your children versus with your students?
Yes, for a very obvious reason, is that my two children are white. They're from my husband's children from a previous marriage, and it's been different. It's really different as a black parent to white children. It's very different to talk to them about racial issues because you never want to. It's one of those sins of the father kind of situations.
Yeah.
You never want to make your kids feel guilty for thinking or accidentally saying something that's just unenlightened or something like that because they don't know. They just don't know, and this is new for them, new for everybody involved. But what I love about talking to my own children and to my students is that children now and young people now are just way more prepared for difficult conversations than I ever was, and it's just from our age group, or my age group rather, growing up and implementing all of that stuff all of those strategies that were taught to us when we were growing up and saying, this world is kind of jacked up and we got to do some things to fix it. And so we kind of built that into our parenting styles. And now our kids are just ready to talk about whatever with any kind of, with openness and with any variations thrown in, they're just like, yeah. And so they just have great vocabulary and they have great understanding. And, being a teacher and also being a parent is difficult because you don't want to, I try my best not to bring my disciplinary policies from the classroom into home and be like, what are you doing? And my kids are like, I don't know what that means. But they're great. My students are wonderful in that they understand me and they know that I have their best interest at heart. And my kids love me and I love my kids. And we have these conversations that are difficult. And I love the fact that they are not scared or frightened to ask me questions about the differences between black and white and Asian and Native American and all things, because they know that I have a different perspective. Right. And they know that they can ask me a question and not be embarrassed because I'm their dad. And they can say, well, my favorite question ever that my son asked me, he said, we were getting ready to go out on the lake a couple weeks ago. And he was like, so do you think that you not having to wear the same kind of sunscreen as I do, is that like a benefit for you? Is that great for you? Because it seems great to me as a kid who hates putting on sunscreen. You having darker skin and not having to do that seems awesome. And I was like, yeah, it's a perk. Yeah. And he's like, awesome. And that was just a conversation that he wanted to have to kind of sort of order that thought in his mind and figure that out. And now he doesn't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to. It's just natural. And I feel so glad that I can have easy conversations with my kids about race. Yeah. I mean, now, difficult conversations about race are different. And I have had to sit my children down and say, okay, there's some things that that are going to be different when we're out. When I'm out with them by myself, there's just different kinds of protocols we have to go through in order to just survive. And those are tough conversations to have. And there's a lot of times when they're like, I don't understand why that's necessary. And I say, I don't either, but it's just the fact of it. Yeah. And it helps. It does help to just work through those things with people that you trust and that you love. Yeah. So that's kind of how I feel about that.
If you don't mind staying kind of with your children for a second, sure. They are growing up in a time that's not easy for any child to kind of develop through and understand right now. Do you have hopes for them growing up in this world personally as they grow into adults, but also do you have any hopes for what they might become to help change the world?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very optimistic about my two children in particular, but this younger generation in general. Gen Z they are amazing in that they understand resilience and they understand adversity. And they also understand humor, which I really think is going to help them. Now, their humor is dark. Gen Z's humor is nihilist and dark, and I love it because it's intellectual. But I think that ability to sort of look directly into the face of something and decide that you're going to not let it affect you adversely, but you're going to make a cutting joke about it, and you're going to get to the heart of the matter and figure that out. That gives me hope for that because I can't tell you just how amazing it is to watch high school students and even younger call each other out on messed up stuff. I've seen more conversations about just people just stopping what we're doing and just looking at their friend and being like, hey, that's racist. Hey, you shouldn't say that because that's misogynist. Hey, you're being grimy. Hey, stop being like, and it's just the way that is. And, boys calling out other boys on misogynistic behavior, girls calling out other girls on, kind of being ridiculous and vicious and anti-woman. Like, it's amazing. And I think the more that we empower these kids and talk to them like adults and give them the adult vocabulary and the adult vision that they don't necessarily have at their age, it's only going to prepare them more for being an adult in this crazy world, whatever it is. Now, I've had to be honest with, it's important for us as the older people to also be honest with these younger people and say, we said this was going to be different, and we said that we were going to leave a better place for y'all, and we didn't do it. Just like our parents didn't do it, and just like their parents didn't do it. And we tried, and we didn't try hard enough. So you have a harder road ahead of you than we did because we didn't do our job. And so being honest with them and saying, you have to do better than we did, I think is powerful, and it's truthful. And what kids and what students and young people want more than anything from their authority figures and from their adults in their lives is they want the truth. They want unvarnished, just what is it really? Because they need to know that, because the world is not going to coddle them when it comes to that. If you come into the world with a half-formed idea and you don't know any way to like explore it and make it like actually real, the world doesn't care, and they're going to really beat down on you for that. So it's important to talk honestly to young people about what the reality of the situation is.
I love that truthfulness you bring to that conversation too. You've shared so much great insight with us, and I'm so glad we were able to have you on today. Kind of one final question for you to wrap us up here, and that is hearkening back to what you said earlier of that, same old question that we see pop up more. When's the first time you had a black male teacher that wasn't a coach, right? What advice, if any, do you have for young black people watching this episode right now who are looking at you, who have never seen someone like you before in a position that you are in, and being like, oh, that's just an anomaly. That's not who I can be.
Right. I would say, if I could give one sort of piece of advice to that, is that I want young people to know that it is totally within their right to take up space. If you're in some place and you feel like you're at any point having to shrink yourself or change yourself or hide who you are in order to fit into that space, leave it. Either leave the space or leave that idea behind you, because wherever you are deserves all of you. And you should not have to edit yourself in order to fit in. So as somebody who grew up and a black person in primarily white spaces, in a primarily white art form, it's okay to insist on your rights and to insist on being heard, because your voice is just as important. And I would also tell those students to, when you're taking up space and when you're affirming your identity, it's very important to set and maintain your boundaries when it comes to your racial identity and the things that they want you to do, be, and share. When you go into, like for me, for example, when I was in graduate school, they tapped me all the time to be, sort of the diversity spot in certain things. And be on panels and just kind of be there as hey, there's our nod to sort of, diversity or whatever, even if it was totally, inappropriate or whatever. And so, there's a meme going around right now where somebody says, they were in graduate school and somebody had approached them about, they're asking me to serve on this diversity thing, and it's going to take a lot of work. And I'm really excited that they asked me. And then the response to that question is, are your white counterparts being asked to do the same, or are they able to just study in peace? So it's important to set boundaries and say, you know what, I'm here to learn, or I'm here to sing, or I'm here to perform, and I don't necessarily need to do anything else. If I want to, I can. But if I don't, I don't. And you don't have to. And there's no pressure to do that, because you do not have to be the representative for your entire race group. It's not necessary. And you don't want that, because that's a level of responsibility that nobody should take on. And so that's what I would tell people, would tell young people is, I may be a little bit of an anomaly in that, it was, a Dallas native growing up in Catholic school who went on to predominantly white universities and took his education as far as he could go. But I was going to do that anyway. And if you're going to do that, if you want that, do it, be it, achieve it, and ask us, and we want you to. But don't ever lose sight of yourself because you're trying to serve others. You can't pour out of an empty cup.
I think that's such great advice, and I thank you so much for sharing your time and talents with us. And I think I speak for everyone who is watching this episode, that what a wonderful asset our city has in having you here with us and being in our community. And I thank you for sharing your light and time with us here today.
Of course. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.